Hey there, and welcome back to Heart Wisdom. This is episode 265, Navigating Impermanence, Suffering, and the Great Turning of the World. I'm Ganesh, and just so honored to open the door for you. If you have been wondering about Jack's reflections on the election and everything that has gone down over the past month or so, this is the episode for you. It is a video episode first recorded for the Spirit Rock Monday Night Dharma Talk and Guided Meditation, which happens weekly and which Jack does monthly as a live stream. And yes, this does touch on politics, but in this episode, Jack says it helps me not to just speak of politics, but to remember art, poetry, and other ways of seeing. And I think this is so important, especially when we build up to the big moment of the election, the decision. We end up getting this really intense tunnel vision on politics, seeing the world only through that lens, through that plane. And I know whenever people would go to Jack's friend Ram Dass, who is actually the namesake of this podcast network, this Be Here Now network of podcasts. And one of the main things that he would teach people when they came to him with problems was how to live on multiple planes at once. And it's very often that we get pulled into a specific plane. Maybe you're just starting a new job. Maybe you're trying to get your feet off the ground as an entrepreneur and you're just focused on the work, the money plane. Maybe you're starting a new family or a new romance, and so many of the other planes, which we're generally so focused on, seem to fade into the background. Or maybe we're taking a very long meditation retreat, a Vipassana retreat for a month. And during that time, the other planes are going to drift away as the spiritual plane becomes the forefront of what we're working with. And when we look at the world, we see that all of these are happening at once. We have warfare going on. We have people meditating. We have, as Jack says, mothers making tortillas for their children. And we have racism, and we have environmental crisis and genocides. And we have people chanting God's name in unison in beautiful kirtans. And we have it all. And all of that, as Jack so eloquently mentions, is rooted in the human heart. All of the beauty, all of the suffering. And so what Jack offers us here in this school of humanity isn't some solace that we're always going to get what we want, or that the good guys, whoever those are always going to win. But what he offers us here is a reflection that suffering is not the end of the story, and that we are here in a school, and that school involves things that we like and things that we don't like. And that true freedom isn't everything working out for us, but that freedom is when we can accept that things change, and when we remember that we choose our own spirit, no matter what. And that is the intro for this week. As always, I implore you to head to jackkornfield.com. Jack has amazing events coming up, like the Spirit Rock Monday Night Dharma Talk for December, which comes on December 16th. It is live stream and pay what you can, so we hope to see you there. And the Power of Awareness, which is a 7-week training on mindfulness and compassion, which Jack does with Tara Brock, Devin Barry, and Conda Mason, begins again on December 2nd. Other than that, please head to the website for amazing courses, articles, Dharma talks, guided meditations, and more podcasts. I would like to thank Be Here Now Network for allowing us to continue this amazing adventure with Jack's Dharma talks. Like to keep a nice cadence of vintage ones as well as these fresh video episodes. So here we go. This is episode 265 of Heart Wisdom, Navigating Impermanence, Suffering, and the Great Turning of the World. May you be happy, may you be healthy, may you help others through the authenticity of your being, and may your heart be smiling. Namaste. Here we are. Big changes afoot.
and what would be useful to do and to talk about. I was trying to think about that for tonight because I'm aware that there have already been dozens of brilliant analysis of what happened in the election from different points of view, from the triumphant to the tear-jerking and catastrophic views. And I'm sure some of you have read all of that. And then there have been all the advice giving. Well, here's how, if you're grieving or if you're dancing in triumph or something, here's how you take care of yourself in times of change so much. You meditate, you go out in nature, you take tea with other people, you make community, you make music and art, read poetry. Because a lot of what politics has done, and it's not new actually, it's part of the political playbook, is to encourage our fear. It's how it works, trying to make you afraid so you'll vote for somebody or other. And behind it are trauma cycles and, people feeling nervous and upset in times of change, some disenfranchised, some concerned, compassionate, some really afraid in other ways because it does fuel fear. And you'll have your grief and your triumph, and you'll be, fed all of this. And then we have all our emotions that come with it, our anxiety and the stories and the thoughts and so forth. But it's hard to see clearly when we're frightened or angry. And in some way, what this time also calls for is to be able to take a step back, center, see anew with the heart, the eyes of understanding, and a kind of wisdom. And so that's the direction I'd like us to go tonight. Now, what's also true is that mindful, loving awareness, we'll do a sitting in just a couple of minutes in meditation. Mindful, loving awareness is big enough to hold all of this praise and blame and gain and loss and triumph and defeat. It's big enough to hold the fact that it's Veterans Day, when we celebrate in some strange, and now it could get almost tearful, the succession of battles and wars, one after another. And we've had a lot of them because the US is also warlike in its history. Many, many. And it's what human beings are doing regularly on the planet. And today, there were 200,000 people who died. Let that in. People holding them and grieving in tears, young and old. And there were 250,000 new people who came in today and were born. It's wild. And here we are, all these different swings of whether it's politics or emotions, the possibilities of how we live together, the difficulties that we make for one another. And in Dharma, the teachings of wisdom invite us to take a breath and to step out of the body of fear and to recognize that the world is not a problem to solve, but it's a living organism, a living being to which we belong. And we are part of the rhythms of all of life, and we are the consciousness that's come at this time. And as in the Tao, where everything has its season, mindful, loving awareness says, take your seat with an open heart and a bigger perspective. Step out of the tyranny of time. What just happened, what happened before that, what will happen, which we don't know, but we have some imagination about. And step into the timeless reality of love and presence and a vast vision. So with this, I guess I should say, Trudy told me I wasn't being compassionate enough when I told her what I was going to talk about. So that could be true. And if so, I apologize. I'll do my best. Anyway, one has to listen to one's spouse, at least somewhat. So this evening, I want to speak to the basics of the teachings that are offered in the Buddhist tradition, but that are really part of all wise spiritual life. It seems in times of change and disruption, we can get engaged in all the complexity of it and also have all our emotions and thoughts and worries activated. But there's something more fundamental that I believe and know deeply can guide us or help us going through complicated times. And these basics first want us to tend to our own heart and mind, to find a way to quiet your mind, tend your heart, keep it steady and loving. And the amazing thing is that this is possible. After becoming president of South Africa, I asked some of my bodyguards to go with me for a walk in town. Then we went for lunch at a local restaurant, sat in a central one. The waiter brought our menus. And at that moment, I realized that at a table right in front of ours, there was a single man waiting to be served. When he was served, I told one of my bodyguards, go ask that man to join us. So the bodyguard, a soldier, went and transmitted the invitation. The man stood up, took his plate, and sat down next to me. While eating, his hands were constantly shaking, and he didn't lift his head from the food. When we finished, he waved at me without even looking directly in my eyes. I shook his hand. He walked away. One of my guards said, Madiba, that man must be very sick. His hands wouldn't stop shaking while he was eating. Not at all. The reason for his tremor is another, I replied. They looked at me quizzically, and I said, that man was the guardian of the jail where I was locked up. Often after the torture I was subjected to, I screamed or cried for water, and he came to humiliate me. He laughed at me, and instead of giving me water, he urinated on my head. He wasn't sick. He was scared and shook, maybe fearing that I, now the president of the country, would send him to jail and do the same thing he did to me, torturing and humiliating him. But that's not me. That behavior is not part of my character, nor of my ethics. Minds that seek revenge destroy states and humans, while those that seek reconciliation build nations and well-being. So when we're invited to tend to our own hearts and mind, Nelson Mandela really reminds us that this is our birthright, that this is possible for us. In addition to tending our own hearts, then, like a bodhisattva, we have to open and listen to the cries, and the fears, and the dreams of the others around us. And there's a lot of fear now. And these are from people who feel not respected or not included, or worried that they will not be, or worried what will happen to them. And I remember seeing this beautiful Tibetan tanka of the sage Milarepa, and he was sitting there clad in his white cotton with one hand cupping his ear in a gesture of the bodhisattva who listens to the cries of the world, so that after we quiet the mind and tend our heart, we listen in a deep and compassionate way, because there's cries on all sides. It helps me not just to speak of politics, but to remember art and poetry, other ways of seeing. William Carlos Williams said, "You can't get the news from poetry, but men and women die every day from lack of what is found there." Something deeper. Here's a poem for you when we speak of respect. Remember how astonished your daughter is at ladybugs and motorcycles, a pebble she finds, a moth, a firefly, the stars that follow the moon, mayflies, streetlights seen from the window before bed. Remember beneath each scarf, bandana, and surgical mask, there's a throat that might break into sudden surprising aria. Remember the image of your lover's brown hair on the pillow in the blue hour of the morning. Any morning is worth more than all your poems and thoughts. Remember, even an angry word from them is worth more than the best line of poetry you've ever read. Remember, your poems cannot shelter you or make a roof for the ones you love. Remember, the earth's sole vocation is to astonish. Remember, the earth's sole vocation is to astonish. We've lived through so many things, ups and downs, and amazing and beautiful and magnificent and terrible and painful and connected and divisive. And this is part of our birth here on earth. To quiet the mind and tend your own heart, to hear the cries of those, the fears, and to see with the eyes of wisdom the reality, the laws of incarnation. To live wisely, these are offered as core teachings. I know if I were to go to Ajahn Chah right now, if he were still alive, and to say, there are many people who are really distraught about what has happened in this election. Not everyone, some of you may be celebrating, and I honor that too. He would look back and he would say, anicca, things change. And smile, as if to say, can you honor that? Change happens. It's the law. Anicca. And then he might tilt his head and say, oh, and dukkha too, the second of the characteristics. Suffering, uncertainty. He'd nod. This is dukkha too. Can you see it? It's how it is. Is your heart big enough to hold it? Now, if I were to ask the Dalai Lama, he would probably look with watery eyes of compassion and say, this is hard to hold. I know it is. Hand on his heart, me too, he would say. And then he would laugh, say, we learned to do this, you know. Anicca, the wisdom of uncertainty. Things change. Nations change, societies change, politics change. We change, we age, we get sick, we die. The Buddha said, did you think this would not happen to you, to the people you care about? All these things come and go. And right now, we're at a big turning point on the earth, what Joanna Macy calls the great turning. Can we shift from a exploitive and consumer consciousness on this planet to one of interdependence and mutual care? Because for well-being, we may need to do this. We do need to do this. And then you might say, well, that's a big order. I don't know if human beings can do it. I don't know it either. But it's not about an election one way or the other. They come and go. There's such huge other forces happening right now. Climate change, artificial intelligence, enormous changes coming. Nuclear fusion energy that could proliferate and offer complete free energy everywhere if it's done right. Huge possibilities and huge problems. And as T.S. Elliot says, in my end is my beginning. Everything that turns then offers a new openness and beginning for something else. There is a freedom when we accept that things change. They do change. We can take our seat and step outside of that small sense of time, the tyranny of our ideas, and feel the great movement of life. I like this poem. When you return, fallen leaves will climb back into trees. Shards of the shattered vase will rise and reassemble on the table. Plastic raincoats will refold into their flat envelopes. The egg, ball, the yolk, and its transparent halo slide back into the thin calcium shell. Curses will pour back into mouths. Letters unwrite themselves. Words siphoned up into the pen. My gray hair will darken and become the feathers of a black swan. Bullets will snap back into their chambers. The powder tamped tight in brass casings. Borders will disappear from maps. Rust revert to oxygen and time. The fire returned to the log to the tree. The white root curled up in the unsplit seed. Birdsong will fly into the lark's young lungs. Answers become questions again. When you return, sweaters will unravel and wool grow on the sheep. Rock will go home to mountain, gold to vein. Wine crushed into grapes, oil pressed into the olives, silk reeled into the spider's body, ink drained from the indigo tattoo. Diamonds will be returned to coal, coal to ferns, rain to clouds, light to stars, sucked back and back into one timeless point. The way it was before the world was born, that fresh, that whole, nothing broken, nothing torn apart. So we take a seat in the freedom outside of time, open to change, the dance of it all. And Nietzsche, there's also dukkha, the three marks. And of course, we know the obvious dukkha of continuing warfare and injustice and racism, the suffering, aging, pain, death, loss. They are our companions. We live in a culture that rather prefers to hide from this. This page, so young and so many pills, was on the cover of the second section of the Wall Street Journal and describes the tens of millions of medications, of antidepressants, and anti-anxiety and ADHD medications and so forth that our children take. This is how our society deals with the stress. Or we hide, blame somebody else. Dukkha is part of life. Did you not notice? And when we open to it, something happens. We realize it's not personal. As Longfellow wrote, if we could read the secret history of our enemies, we would find sorrow and suffering enough to disarm all hostility. It's us. Impermanence and suffering and dukkha. And what comes out of it, if we turn toward it, if we acknowledge that this is the way it is such tenderness and compassion. Zen Master Isa's three poetic lines: dew evaporates, and all this world is dew. This is the Zen saying of the dewdrop world, so ephemeral. Dew evaporates, and all this world is dew. So dear, so refreshing, so fleeting. Now listen one more time, because these three lines were written on the death of his young daughter. And you'll hear what he really meant. Dew evaporates, and all this world is dew. So dear, so refreshing, and so fleeting. This is what opens the heart, that we share this. We share dukkha and anicca. Yes, tonight I could do loving kindness, compassion, and joy, and equanimity. But these are the basic laws as well. Impermanence, instability of things, endless change. And our freedom comes when we understand that dukkha is not a mistake. You didn't make a mistake. Somebody didn't make a mistake. and therefore we have suffering in human life. I mean, we have much more than suffering, with beauty and magnificent love and so forth. And there's dukkha. And it's just the reality of our life as well. Now, sometimes these three marks, as they're called, anicca or impermanence, and dukkha, unstable, unsatisfactory, can't be held, sufferings, sometimes, and the third one, anatta or selflessness, the emptiness of it all. It's also called, instead of anicca, dukkha, and anatta, Thich Nhat Hanh replaces dukkha with nirvana. He wanted people to understand that not only is there the field of suffering when we're attached and identified, but there's an unshakable freedom, unshattered freedom. Here he writes, "This body is not me. I am life without boundaries. I have never been born. I have never died. Look at the ocean and the sky filled with stars, manifestations of the wondrous true mind, consciousness itself. Since before time I've been free. Birth and death are only doors through which we pass, sacred thresholds. Birth and death are a game of hide and seek. So laugh with me, hold my hand. Let us love now, and then let us say goodbye, only to meet again soon. We will meet again tomorrow at the source of every moment. We meet each other in all the forms of life. This body is not me. I am life without boundaries." These are profound, wild, and liberating teachings. You live in illusion and the appearance of things, said Kala Rinpoche. There is a reality, but you do not know this. And when you understand, you will see that you are nothing. And being nothing, you are everything. That is all. And this is the invitation to step from the small sense of self, the individual, that we have to take care of and carry and pay our taxes and stop on the red lights, so forth. But the sense of separation is also a fiction. We are interwoven in the breath of the earth and the trillion organisms that live within our own body. Most of you is not you, you know. It's all the other microorganisms in your gut and your eyes and your fingernail, every other part of your body. And we know that we're not separate. You know it especially when you're on the mountaintop looking down from some amazing hike or listening to a piece of music that transports you beyond that small sense of self. You know it when you make love or take psychedelics or have some profound meditation or dance until you disappear. We all know it. And the world, let's see how to say it. Where is this passage I was looking for? Oh, beautiful passage from an Australian Aboriginal elder. Well, I'll tell you about the story, the real story, where you feel. Listen carefully this. You can hear me. I'm telling you because Earth, just like mother and father or brother of you, that tree, same thing. Your body, my body, I suppose, I'm same as you. anyone, tree, working when you sleeping and dreaming. That star, he's working there. See? He's working. I can see. Always at night, if you lie down, look careful. He's working. See? When you sleep, bloody pumping. So you look, he goes pink, he comes white. See him work. He work. In the night you dream, lay down. That star is working for you. Trees, grass, working for you. Wow. What an understanding. It's all working for you. It's all a part of you. There are a billion causes and conditions that allow you to exist today. We don't have to talk about politics or, nations. It is so extraordinary that existence is here. And you and I get to play our part in this great dance. We get to plant seeds. In the Bhagavad Gita, there's Arjuna, who doesn't want to go out on the field of battle, and finally realizes that the great lesson is to do your best, to plant seeds, to act well without attachment to the fruits of your actions. Because you don't get to decide, you get to reach out and touch and mend what you can with your hand. I looked at our past election as a ritual. Politics is a little bit like ritual warfare, only instead of the Democrats and Republicans and the Libertarians and the Greens all mounting their tanks or their cannons or their steeds with their swords and going to Washington to see who gets to win and take over for a while. It's ritualized, but it's sort of the same thing. And I think it's astonishing that hundreds of millions of people could participate in it. And even though it is troubling and troublesome and got its really messy parts and smelly in some ways, it kind of worked. It was this huge ritual that we did, and we didn't, destroy each other, in any way. Kind of extraordinary. So you now get to take the role that was assigned to you by your karma or central casting or however you want to say it. You got put in a pretty weird role. You know that, right? And then you get to do something with it. And this is the freedom. The freedom is that, like Arjuna, here you are and it's messy and you don't want to go on the field of battle, but it is your task wherever you are. And then you bring your heart and you say, all right, then let me choose to do something beautiful. Howard Zinn, to be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic. It is based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, and kindness. What we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives. If we see only the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. But if we remember those times and places, and there are so many where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act and the possibility of sending this spinning top of the world into a beautiful direction. Oh, wise ones that you are, remember, there's a freedom just where you are to choose in the midst of anicca and change, dukkha inevitable, and all the causes and conditions. You get to choose. You get to choose your spirit no matter what. What greater gift could there be? Now remember that it's also helpful to acknowledge in changing times that there is refuge to be found. Traditionally, refuge in Buddha and Dharma and Sangha. Just take a pause for a minute. The Buddhist texts begin, "O nobly born, remember who you really are. Remember the dignity and freedom that was born in you." Yes, we humans can and do get lost in separateness and tribalism and conflict in the body of fear. But we can also see beings with unconditional love and from a place of freedom, as Nelson Mandela did in that restaurant. We can also do that. The human race tends to remember the abuses to which it has been subjected rather than the endearments. What's left of kisses? Wounds, however, leave scars. That's Bertolt Brecht. We forget the kisses sometimes and remember the trauma and the wound, but there's so much more. Refuge in the Buddha, to see beings with unconditional love, to understand somehow that we can turn toward this life as a bodhisattva, as a being who deliberately turns toward suffering and difficulty and says, "Oh, I've been called. Let me help alleviate suffering. Let me help beings be free." Even if the sun should arise in the west, the bodhisattva has only one way. When there's something difficult, their heart opens, their eyes open, they say, this is the place for me to add something beautiful. I can hear Krishnadas, my friend, chanting this song that was given to him or that he wrote from a Zen prayer from Roshi Bernie Glassman. I wish I could sing it to you in his style. I'd need a harmonium and a better voice. Calling out to hungry hearts everywhere through endless time. You who wander, you who thirst, I offer you this Bodhi mind. Calling out to hungry spirits everywhere through endless time. Calling out to hungry hearts, all the lost and the left behind. Gather round and share this meal. Your joy and your sorrow, I make it mine. Your joy and your sorrow, I make it mine. And here's the freedom that you find here. The freedom to step out of fear. And Nietzsche, it's the way it is, dukkha, that's part of the game. Freedom from fear. You turn toward the difficult and say, oh yes, the perfect place to care, to build compassion, to transform beings. You rely on your own true nature, the Buddha nature, the nobility of beings. You rely on the Dharma, the truth, the laws, and the way things are. Human suffering grows when there's more greed, more hatred, and more ignorance. We can see lots of it in human society, individually, our families, our communities. our societies. But there's an opposite. Instead of greed, we can cultivate generosity. Instead of hatred, we can cultivate love. Instead of ignorance, we can cultivate wisdom. There's suffering and its causes. The more greed and hate, the more we suffer. The more love and wisdom and clarity, the more freedom and well-being we find. Helen Keller put it this way: the world, although the world is full of suffering, it is also full of the overcoming of it. And this gives birth to compassion. When we see with the eyes of the Dharma, we see the possibility of living in a different way. One of the Buddhist texts: others will be cruel, we shall not be cruel, thus we will incline the heart. Others will steal and take what is not given, we shall be generous, thus we shall incline the heart. Others will speak falsely and maliciously, we will tell the truth with kindness, thus we will incline the heart. Others will be envious, we will be appreciative, thus we will incline the heart. Others will be arrogant, we will have humility, thus we will incline the heart. Others will be unmindful and uncaring, we will be mindful and caring, thus we will incline the heart. Others around will lack wisdom, we shall cultivate and live with wisdom and blessings, and thus we will incline the heart. It's a recitation of the noble truths of the path of the Dharma. Although the world is full of suffering, it is also full of the overcoming of it. And it's lawful. We can plant seeds of goodness, and eventually they will bear fruit. Maybe not in our lifetime, but they will. And this is our freedom, to know what's true. Hatred never ceases by hatred, but by love alone is healed. This is the ancient and eternal law. And this is the Dharma. You know this. So we're being called to remember the deep and basic truths in the midst of all that's going on. And that is our freedom. Others may do certain things. We know who we are in heart and mind. O nobly born, remember refuge in Buddha nature and fundamental dignity, liberation of heart. O nobly born, remember the Dharma, the possibility of awakening just where we are. Remember Sangha, community. The monastic Buddhist communities, along with the giants of the oldest living continuous community of humans organized in that way. And it's an expression of our collective wisdom. You know it and I know it when I've worked in nonprofits and corporations and things. An individual's understanding is always limited. And it's so helpful and wonderful to come together with other people and say, how do you see it? Let me understand how it looks from your perspective. What do you have to offer? And almost always, the result is better. We need one another in so many ways. and we care for one another. You know, if there's an accident near you, someone falls in the street, something, the initial impulse is, how do I help? How can I make a difference? So it is who we are. Community is born into us, or we're born into community is probably a better way to say it. You come out of your mother's womb, right? You're already in community. And you look around. Yeah. Don't forget it in these times. Sangha, community, mutual care, so uplifting and so liberating. When I graduated from nursing school at age 40, the only job I could get was at a Veterans Affairs hospital. The work was challenging in every possible way. It didn't help that the veterans teased me relentlessly, asking over and over if I was married. I'm a lesbian. My growing discomfort with the question seemed only to egg them on. Meanwhile, caring for them required a great deal of physical intimacy. While changing a dressing or washing a severely ill patient, I often could tell it had been a long time since they had been touched with kindness. Gradually, I came to love the crusty old vets and the stubborn guys in detox, many of whom were homeless. Their spirit and resilience in the face of tremendous adversity were a kind of miracle. Later, I worked on the psychiatric ward where patients could become argumentative, angry, aggressive. I sometimes didn't feel safe there, especially after it occurred to me that all these troubled veterans were combat trained. Once, a large psychotic man approached me in a really threatening manner, just as I was starting to get truly worried. An equally large Vietnam vet with dementia quietly came between us. Several other vets seemed to appear out of nowhere, and they stood nearby in silence. I felt safe. I retired now, but I still volunteer on that ward twice a week. I feel like I'm visiting my family. This is us. This is us. You know, Chan Master Cheng Yen says, those who do not have faith in others will not be able to stand on their own. Those who are suspicious will always be lonely. What does it mean to have faith in others? To trust, to feel the Sangha. This is the freedom of the heart of community. The heart knows that you're supported by millions and billions and gazillions of beings, from the earthworms and the hummingbirds, you know, and the field mice and the trillion microorganisms growing in your intestines and around your body, and the countless numbers of good deeds being done every day by billions of human beings for one another, to help each other. So many ways. Caring for family, for community. That's the web that we don't see in the newspapers, in the media. But there's something even greater, if you will, or as great, when you look for your freedom of heart. And that is to understand that you have backup. Your backup is Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth and Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King and Lehman Gabowi Archbishop Tutu and Wangari Maathai and Thomas Jefferson on his good days, and Marie Curie, and all the sages and saints of thousands of years, they're your backup. They're part of you. And the trees, as that beautiful Aboriginal vision says, they're working for you. And the creatures working for you. This is the great freedom, that you're not alone. You're supported and loved and part of this no matter what. And yes, there's impermanence and there's dukkha. Just how it is. Incarnation, birth and death, gain and loss, praise and blame, joy and sorrow. We all have. And there's something bigger, who we really are. The mystery of consciousness itself, born into this body and incarnation. And the invitation is to the great heart of compassion and understanding. You are free, and you're free to do beautiful things with your life. Let's just take a minute quiet, please.